When it comes to just about everything we've done to strengthen our middle class, to rebuild our economy, almost every Republican in Congress says no.
You know, you gotta love these Republicans. I mean, you guys...
Even on things we usually agree on, they say no.
They say that, well, this isn't going to do enough, but when we propose an alternative to provide competition, they're against it.
If I said the sky was blue, they say no.
And it's also pretty clear the American people are still demanding and asking the question, where are the jobs?
After months of partisan blockade in the Senate, we are finally on the verge of passing a small business jobs bill that will cut taxes and provide loans for millions of small business owners across America.
And the reason we don't have new jobs is because of the job-killing agenda pursued by President Obama and his allies in the Congress. They really do have employers scared to death.
It's a bill that's paid for. It won't add a dime to the deficit.
Democrats are putting politics over prosperity.
So they said no to help for small businesses, even when the small businesses said we desperately need this. This used to be their key constituency, they said. They said no.
Republicans proposed a deficit commission. President Obama endorsed the idea, so then Republicans decided they're against it.
The American people are still asking the question, where are the jobs?
It's a bill that was written by both Democrats and Republicans, but for months, the Republican leadership in the Senate has said no.
They say that, well, we want to strengthen state insurance commissioners and they'll do the job. But when we did that in our national health care bill, they said, we're against it.
And so what the other side calculated was, you know, if we just sit on the sidelines, we let Obama and the Democrats in Congress deal with everything, then we can do well in the polls. That was their theory. And that's what they did for the last 20 months. They've said no to just about every idea I've proposed, every policy I've proposed, even ideas they've traditionally agreed with. No, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, we had situations where they would sponsor bills, I'd say okay, and then they'd say, oh, well, if you're okay with it, we must be against it. Happened a bunch of times. That's true.
Republicans proposed pay-as-you-go rules for budgeting. President Obama endorsed the idea, then Republicans decided they were against it, too.
They said they want to have competition, and when we proposed requiring competition, the Republicans are against it.
They just think it's better to score political points before an election than to solve problems.
Their health care bill, more mandates, higher costs, higher taxes.
Our approach would preserve the right of Americans who have insurance to keep their doctor and their plan. It would reduce costs and premiums for millions of families and businesses.
Who is David Walker and why should we care? He's the nation's top accountant, the Comptroller General of the United States.
There's not going to be enough wage earners to pay for the benefits of the baby boomers.
That's part of the problem. But the real problem, Steve, is health care cost. Our health care problem is much more significant than Social Security.
What do you mean by that?
By that I mean that the Medicare problem is 5 times greater than the Social Security problem.
And according to the Congressional Budget Office, the independent organization that both parties have cited as the official scorekeeper for Congress, our approach would bring down the deficit by as much as $1 trillion over the next 2 decades.
And if all that isn't bad enough, they want to raise the taxes on the American people. It's no wonder that employers are frozen.
No to middle-class tax cuts. They say they're for tax cuts. I say, okay, let's give tax cuts to the middle class. No.
Republicans who voted for the bank bailout are now criticizing President Obama for that same bank bailout.
Let's talk about it. It's interesting. You talk the debt, the importance of covering government spending, and you worry about the Democrats raising taxes. The Obama administration wants to extend the Bush tax cuts only for those who make less than $250,000, and he wants to let them expire for those wealthy Americans making more than that. You're opposed to that.
That we simply don't have time anymore to play games.
Listen, I'm new to this, okay? I've only been in Congress now for barely 8 months. And I wish when I came to Congress I saw some thoughtful opposition from the other side. But instead, all they do is drag their heels day after day.
So when you
month
accuse
after month.
Republicans of being Neanderthals, you're talking about John Boehner, the Republican leader, Eric Kent, are you talking about the leadership of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives?
Whoever it is causing the Republicans to fight tooth and nail against anything, absolutely anything, to have every vote come down to being 257 to 175 in the House, over and over and over again. Those are the people who are really disserving America.
Not just on this small business jobs bill. Let me give you another example. Right now, we could decide to extend tax relief for the middle class. Right now, we could decide that every American household would receive a tax cut on the first $250,000 of their income. But once again, the leaders across the aisle are saying no.
And then I just want to, on the red ink that you guys all referenced here, how do you avoid that? I mean, I see even if you could enforce this cap, you'd be at cutting $100 billion a year. You've got a $1.4 trillion deficit. I mean, what are you actually going to cut? Are you willing to go in and start cutting entitlements, which is, of course, where the real money is?
You cannot, if we're going to deal with deficits and we're going to be honest with the American people, we have to cut spending, and we need real economic growth in America that puts more Americans back to work, caring for themselves and caring for their families. And you can't have real economic growth in America if you insist on raising taxes on the American people.
Make no mistake, he and his party believe we should also give a permanent tax cut to the wealthiest 2% of Americans. With all the other budgetary pressures we have, with all the Republicans talk about wanting to shrink the deficit, they would have us borrow $700 billion over the next 10 years to give a tax cut of about $100,000 each to folks who are already millionaires.
I would argue that the most serious threat to the United States is not someone hiding in a cave in Afghanistan or Pakistan, but our own fiscal irresponsibility.
Republicans supported President Bush's policy of trying terrorism suspects in U.S. courts. Now that President Obama is implementing that same policy, they've decided they're against that now, too.
For months, they've used legislative maneuvers to prevent this bill from even coming up for a vote. And all the while, small business owners kept waiting for help. They kept putting off plans to hire more workers and grow their businesses.
You're opposed to that. You want to extend the tax cuts, and the Republican leadership does. But Alan Greenspan, who was on this program last week, chairman of the Federal Reserve, said that's the wrong idea. Here's what he said.
Look, I'm very much in favor of tax money. And the problem that we've gotten into in recent years is spending programs with borrowed money, tax cuts with borrowed money, and at the end of the day, that proves disastrous.
I don't think people have a sense of what the numbers are here. When we talk about the tax cuts, the Republican plan right now, it would add $4 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. Nothing that Obama has done, even if you multiply it by itself a couple times over, has done anything like that. That is 5 times larger than the stimulus. That is, I think it's about 15 times larger than what TARP will end up being, which will only be about $66 billion. So this is a huge increase on the deficit.
You don't agree with Republican leaders who say tax cuts pay for themselves?
They do not.
Leader Boehner, he puts it right to you.
The only way we're going to get our economy going again and solve our budget problems is to get the economy moving, get more people back to work where they can care for their own families, and begin to expand the tax rules to bring more revenue to the federal government.
Now, as we stabilized the financial system, we also took steps to get our economy growing again, save as many jobs as possible, and help Americans who'd become unemployed. That's why we extended or increased unemployment benefits for more than 18 million Americans, made health insurance 65% cheaper for families who get their coverage through COBRA, and passed 25 different tax cuts.
We have to get our arms around the spending spree that's going on in Washington, D.C.
And the surprising detail, the deficit is down. The Treasury Department reports the U.S. is on track to record a $1.3 trillion deficit for the first fiscal year of President Obama's presidency. 8% lower. That is 8% lower, despite the stimulus spending, than the 2009 deficit, which included the last months of the Bush presidency and reflected economic policy signed into law by the end of 2008 by President Bush. House Republican leader John Boehner wants to increase that deficit by $700 billion over 10 years by extending those Bush tax cuts on income over $250,000.
But Leader Boehner, I'm sorry, you're not being
problem.
responsive to a specific point, which is how can you be for cutting the deficit and also cutting taxes as well when they're not paid for?
Listen, you can't raise taxes in the middle of a weak economy without risking a double dip in this recession.
Now, I just don't believe this makes any sense. Even as we debate whether it's wise to spend $700 billion on tax breaks for the wealthy, doesn't it make sense for us to move forward with the tax cuts that we all agree on?
Raising taxes at this point in the economy is a very bad idea.
But do you agree that tax cuts cannot be paid for?
Without a help.
But tax cuts are not paid for. Is that correct?
I am not for raising taxes on the American people in a soft economy.
That's not the question, Leader Boehner. The question is...
Remember, all the lapsing of the Bush tax cuts means for people at the top is that they would go back to the Clinton era, a marginal income tax of 39% and a 20% capital gains tax. Remember, under Bill Clinton, the economy did very, very well. People tend to think, oh, horrible that we would subject the richest Americans to the marginal tax rates under Bill Clinton. The economy was very prosperous in those days.
We should be able to extend right now middle-class tax relief on the first $250,000 of income, which, by the way, 97% of Americans make less than $250,000 a year. So right off the bat, 97% of all Americans would get tax relief on all their income. People who are making more than $250,000 a year, say you're making $500,000, you'd still get tax relief on half your income. And everybody agrees that this makes sense.
The people that the president wants to tax.
Are tax cuts paid for or not?
Listen, what you're trying to do is get into this Washington game, and they're funny accounting over there.
But don't you have to come up with something a little more specific? Some people say, look, it would be a lot better if you'd make a few compromises here and try to work with the president to dig our way out of this hole that we all find ourselves in.
Hey, Bob, listen. I want to work with the president on behalf of the American people. That's what they sent us to Washington to do. And while I like the president as much as the American people do, I think he's a great guy. There are serious differences in terms of the approach that he would like to take and the approach that I think many Republicans would like to take.
Republicans supported a cap-and-trade policy against global warming. Now that President Obama is trying to pass that same policy, Republicans have decided, say it with me now, they're against that too. Seeing the pattern here?
Middle-class families need this relief. These are the Americans who saw their wages and incomes flatline over the last decade, who've seen the costs of everything from health care to college tuition skyrocket, and who have been hardest hit by this recession.
This is the story that has me fired up tonight. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has proven once again how heartless, how out of touch, and how flat-out cruel the Republican Party really is. McConnell thinks the people who have been hit hardest by this America's Great Recession are the wealthy in this country.
We can't let the people who've been hit the hardest by this recession and who need to create the jobs that will get us out of it foot the bill for the Democrats' two-year adventure in expanded government.
I could not believe that when I heard it. He thinks that the wealthiest Americans have paid the biggest price.
Extending these tax cuts is right.
You cannot get the economy going again by raising taxes on those people who we expect to create jobs in America and to get the economy going again.
Well, let me just add in our last minute, I mean, you can hear the objections to that, the same ones we're hearing right now from Republicans and some Democrats, that would hurt small businesses, that would hurt the investors, the very people who potentially can get economic growth back again.
Well, let me emphasize, number one, small business leaders were not hurt during the Clinton years, where the Clinton marginal tax rate on the top earners was 39%. Secondly, only 3% of small business owners have incomes over $250,000 and would be affected in any event.
Let me just say this. The Joint Committee on Taxation, which is a nonpartisan body, says that only 3% of those small business people, you keep talking about all the small business people that are going to get taxed, only 3% would be affected by that. Or do you quarrel with that figure? Is that a right figure or a wrong figure?
Well, it may be 3%, but it's half of small business income because obviously the top 3% have half of the gross income for those companies that we would term small businesses.
A variety of sources, including court documents, confirm that when Republicans talk about the small businesses they're trying to help with their tax cut, they're actually talking about some of the biggest companies in the world and some of the richest people in this country. Mr. Boehner admitting this summer that his tax cuts only benefit 3% of so-called small businesses.
The other thing to note, Jeff, is that when Republicans and others who don't want to go back to the Clinton tax rates talk about small businesses, they fail to acknowledge that most of the really very wealthy small businesses, the ones that are earning a lot of money, those are really individuals. They are investment bankers, or they are doctors or lawyers who have registered themselves, and they talk about themselves, and they also file income taxes as if they're businesses, and that's good for them in terms of their tax rate, but they don't generate a lot of jobs.
They call them pass-through companies because they file no taxes, passing through profits to the owners who report them on their individual tax returns instead. In short, they are considered small, not because they have a small payroll, but because they have a small number of owners. It's not the income that's small. It's not the number of employees that's small. It's just the total number of owners that's small.
These are not mom-and-pop stores or mom-and-pop factories. These are very high-paid professionals. So there's no reason that they should be subjected to another year, or there's no reason that they should get another year of the Bush tax cut that was really designed, and everybody expected it would be only 10 years.
According to the Washington Post, more than 1 million people who reported at least $200,000 in income in 2008 were partnerships and S-corps. The richer you are, the more likely you are to call yourself a small business that way. 89% of Americans who make more than $10 million a year filed as a partnership or as an S-corp. In 2008, more than 500,000 of these supposed small businesses had more than $1 million in assets. In 2005, almost 20,000 of them had annual receipts of more than $50 million.
But aren't you kind of holding the tax cuts for the lower income people, the people making less than $250,000 hostage, so you can give those tax cuts to the upper brackets? I mean, there are a lot more people below those top brackets than are in than those upper brackets. Why wouldn't you want to do something for those folks?
I want to do something for all Americans who pay taxes. When you start to look at who's going to be taxed, about half of all small business income will be taxed under the president's proposal. These are the very people that we expect to invest in the economy and to begin creating jobs. Why would we want to punish them?
Farrell Gas, which provides propane and propane accessories with a small business touch to 1 million customers. A small business.
It is just, it will help our economy because middle-class folks are the folks who are most likely to actually spend this tax relief.
What we tend to forget when we talk about taxes is that most middle-class, working-class people are already taxed enormously. The sales taxes in most states have gone up. The taxes that we call payroll taxes that deal with Social Security and unemployment insurance, those payroll taxes, FICA, have actually gone up. 80% of American workers pay more in payroll taxes than they do in income taxes.
And if the other party continues to hold these tax cuts hostage, these are the same families who will suffer the most when their taxes go up next year. And if we can't get an agreement with Republicans, that's what will happen.
If we want to solve the budget problem, we've got to have a healthy economy, and We have to get our arms around the runaway spending that's going on in Washington, D.C.
I just want to clarify this. I mean, I'm relying on what Chairman Greenspan said, maybe if you're accusing him of funding Washington games.
I understand there's an election coming up. But the American people didn't send us here to just think about our jobs. They sent us here to think about theirs. They sent us here to think about their lives and their children's lives and to be responsible and to be serious about the challenges we face as a nation.
He says that tax cuts that aren't paid for are not cutting the deficit, that they are not actually paid for. It's borrowed money. And so do you believe tax cuts pay for themselves or not?
I do believe that we've got to get more money in the hands of small businesses and American families to get our economy going again. And the only way to get that economy going again is to do that and to get our arms around the spending.
But understand, if we don't take meaningful steps to rein in our debt, it could damage our markets, increase the cost of borrowing, and jeopardize our recovery, all of which would have an even worse effect on our job growth and family incomes. From some on the right, I expect we'll hear a different argument. If we just make fewer investments in our people, extend tax cuts, including those for the wealthier Americans, eliminate more regulations, maintain the status quo on health care, our deficits will go away. The problem is, that's what we did for 8 years.
Try to make sure that any serious candidate for the president, and most importantly the two nominees for the major parties, that they make fiscal responsibility one of their top 3 priorities. If they don't deserve to be president. And if they don't, we're in trouble.
Let's see if they listen.
And the reality is people are worried about their future, and ultimately your point is the right one. I only make the point about the back and forth of it. There has to be some honesty about bipartisanship. You can't in the morning say you want it, in the afternoon do everything.
Let's talk about
the
Mr. President, a point of clarification. What's in the Better Solutions book are all the legislative proposals
I understand.
that
I've
were offered
actually read your bills.
throughout 2009.
I understand.
And so rest assured the summary document you received is backed up by precisely the kind of detailed legislation that Speaker Pelosi and your administration have been busy ignoring for 12 months.
Right. Wait, hold on a second.
Well,
No. Hold on a second.
Well, I mean, the last time that we had Republicans in to do a bipartisan summit, or the first time we had Republicans in for a bipartisan summit at the White House, right, was March of last year. The Republicans in the House proposed 4 planks that they wanted in health reform. They wanted buying insurance across state lines, allowing individuals to pool together, state innovation, and tort reform. Versions of all of those things are in the bill. Famously in April, President Obama said, if I'm willing to go a lot further than I have on tort reform, what are you willing to give? Republicans said nothing. We're literally not willing to give anything in exchange for that. So the idea that it's just now that Democrats want to sit down with Republicans is, again, it's factually wrong, even though it's Beltway common wisdom.
No. Hold on a second, guys. You know, Mike, I've read your legislation. I take a look at this stuff and the good ideas we take. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, I guess, that all of us have to be mindful of. It can't be all or nothing one way or the other.
The stimulus, that was a big debate here this week. Both of you were supporters of it. The Republican Party, though, staked out a pretty stark position on the stimulus. It was summed up by Mitt Romney at the CPAC convention this week when he basically, this is his take, and really speaking for the Republican Party in general on what the stimulus did.
He scared employers, so jobs were scarce. His nearly $1 trillion stimulus created not one net new job in the private sector.
If we put together a stimulus package in which a third of it are tax cuts that normally you guys would support, that your governors certainly would support, Democrat or Republican, and then you've got some infrastructure, and maybe there's some things in there that you don't like in terms of infrastructure, or you think the bill should have been $500 billion instead of $700 billion, or there's this provision or that provision that you don't like. If there's uniform opposition because the Republican caucus doesn't get 100%, or 80% of what you want, then it's going to be hard to get a deal done. That's because that's not how democracy works.
Not one net new job in the private sector.
Governor Schwarzenegger, that is where the Republicans are. The stimulus was a failure, and it did not create one net new job in the private sector. True?
Well, to me, I find it interesting that you have a lot of the Republicans running around and pushing back on the stimulus money and saying this doesn't create any new jobs. And then they go out and they do the photo ops and they're posing with the big check and they say, isn't this great? Look what the kind of money I provide here for the state, and this is great money to create jobs, and this has created 10,000 new jobs, and this has created 20,000 new jobs, and all of those kind of things. It doesn't match up.
What we really need to do is work together in a responsible way to address the needs of our economy and the needs of American families and small businesses.
Last week, the Senate blocked a law that I had supported to create a bipartisan fiscal commission that would come up with a set of recommendations for cutting our deficits in the long term. This is a difficult thing. It's only going to be solved if we do it together. This law failed by 7 votes when 7 Republicans who had co-sponsored the bill, had co-sponsored the idea, suddenly walked away from their own proposal after I endorsed it.
At the top of the show today, we talked about the myth of bipartisanship, the futility of Democrats, including the president, wasting time trying to persuade Republicans to go along with them on policies that are good for the country.
No to clean energy jobs. No to making college more affordable. No to reforming Wall Street.
It totally makes sense in the abstract. If people can agree on what needs to be done to solve the country's problems, then those policies, even if they're big policies, should get votes from everyone who's in agreement. In the abstract, that's how it works. In Washington, that is not at all how it works.
I heard somebody out here was yelling, "Yes, we can." Remember that was our slogan? Their slogan is, "No, we can't."
New jobs, and this has created 20,000 new jobs, and all of those kind of things. It doesn't match up.
It's hypocrisy.
So exactly. So I mean, I think
hypocrisy at the highest level.
I think I don't want to beat up of my Republican colleagues, but I think it's kind of politics rather than thinking about only one thing. And this is, how do we support the president? How do we support him and do everything that we can in order to go and stimulate the economy, get the economy back, and think about the people rather than politics?
So they make a proposal, they sign on to the bill. I say, great, good idea. I turn around. They're gone. What happened? Now, look, it's one thing to have an honest difference of opinion on something. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can't walk away from your responsibilities to confront the challenges facing the country because you don't think it's good short-term politics. We can't afford that. We can't afford that.
What Republicans are doing on policy is no longer interesting. It is so thoroughly, unrelentingly, consistently predictable that anyone who thinks it's an open question as to what Republicans are going to do about the next legislation that's proposed just is not paying attention.
Tomorrow we're expecting another dismal jobs report on top of the 500,000 jobs that were lost last month, on top of the 500,000 jobs that were lost the month before that, on top of the 2.6 million jobs that were lost last year. Now, for you, these aren't just statistics. This is not a game.
I have been the first governor of the Republican governors to come out and to support the stimulus money because I said to myself, this is terrific. And anyone that says it hasn't created a job, they should talk to the 150,000 people that have been getting jobs in California.
Private sector?
Yeah, from the private sector and also from the public sector.
So the American people are watching. They did not send us here to get bogged down with the same old delay, the same old distractions, the same talking points, the same cable chatter.
Let me be emphatic here. Let me be emphatic about one particular example, the stimulus. The stimulus passed despite every single Republican in the House voting no on it. Everyone. Since then, the consensus among economists is that the stimulus has worked, even though it's maybe been too small. The consensus among Republicans is that it's been a horrible giant thing that hasn't done anything good at all.
Aren't you all tired of that stuff? They did not vote for the false theories of the past, and they didn't vote for phony arguments and petty politics. They didn't vote for the status quo. They sent us here to bring change. We owe it to them to deliver.
I think everybody would agree now that the stimulus hasn't worked.
An $800 billion pork-laden stimulus bill that was supposed to create jobs.
With a stimulus package that has been done so well, we now have 10.2% unemployment.
The vaunted Democratic stimulus bill has failed to stimulate anything other than a few federal bureaucrats.
Many warned, as did I, that the stimulus would amount to a mountain of wasted money.
Can you tell me where the stimulus money is?
This is not a contest for who's in power and who's up and who's down. These are your constituents. These are families you know and you care about. I believe that it is important for us to set aside some of the gamesmanship in this town and get something done.
The $787 billion stimulus package only stimulated more welfare.
We're united in imposing the massive waste-filled stimulus, or as I prefer to call it, stimulus bill.
If there's one thing that Republicans agree on now, it's that the stimulus is a bad policy. It's a bad idea that does bad things. It's a bad president's bad way of making a bad economy more bad because he's bad. Stimulus bad.
You also have been very critical of the Democrats' stimulus package. But Democrats say, and let's put this up, that your state of Kentucky has been awarded $2.5 billion in funding, which has created or saved more than 10,000 jobs. And they say that you supported $6 million in stimulus funding for the Bluegrass Army Depot in your state. In fact, last August you were at the depot and you said this: this is going to be a source of significant employment.
Also, stimulus good. What you're looking at here are pictures of the same Republicans who have trashed the stimulus as a bad thing in their home districts, taking credit for all the good things the stimulus has done. That's Bobby Jindal there, governor of Louisiana, who has railed against the stimulus, then gone around the state handing out big fake checks with his own name on them as if the money came from him instead of from the stimulus that he's been railing against. Then there's Congressman Phil Gingrey of Georgia. That's him getting all Publishers Clearinghouse with a giant check for funds that he voted against, and then criticized as worse than worthless. He called the money in that check he's holding a boondoggle, excuse me, and a dismal failure.
Let me bring in Governor Barber. Mississippi, I don't have to tell you, has 10.6% unemployment, also above the national average. A year ago, you were talking about not accepting stimulus funds. And let's look at the record here. Your latest state budget included $370 million in stimulus funds. Public schools are getting more funding than ever before. And stimulus road project signs are up around the state with your name on them.
I don't care whether you're driving a hybrid or an SUV. If you're headed for a cliff, you've got to change direction. That's what the American people called for in November, and that's what we intend to deliver.
And it's not just a couple of these guys who have been caught like this either. Republican John Mica of Florida trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district as helping improve one of our key economic generators. Republican Frank Wolf of Virginia trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying, we could use that money desperately. There are a lot of things up here that money could be used for.
Let me say from my heart, on behalf of House Republicans, Democrats are putting politics over prosperity.
There was an interesting headline in CNN today. Americans disapprove of stimulus but like every policy in it.
Republican Bill Schuster of Pennsylvania trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home state by attending the groundbreaking of a sewage treatment plant that it funded and praising the jobs that it would create in his district. Republican Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison of Texas trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in her home state by saying this funding will spur growth in Texas communities. Republican Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district as a great thing for this county. We're not accustomed to federal dollars in that magnitude finding their way to North Carolina.
And there was a poll that showed that if you broke it down into its component parts, 80% approved of the tax cuts, 80% approved of the infrastructure, 80% approved of the assistance to the unemployed.
Republican Senator Kit Bond of Missouri trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying it would create jobs and ultimately spur economic opportunities. Republican Joe Wilson of South Carolina, remember him, the "you lie" guy?
There are also those who claim that our reform efforts would ensure illegal immigrants. This, too, is false. The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally. It's not true.
He trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying it would provide jobs and investment in one of the poorer sections of that district. Republican Senator Bob Bennett of Utah trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying the addition of federal funds would maximize the stimulative effect on the local economy.
There is nothing counterintuitive about stimulus. There is nothing confusing about it. It is only when you call it stimulus, a big, vague mess of a $787 billion bill, that people get confused. But when it gets specific, like in these letters, there's no confusion at all.
What about the stimulus program? Do you think it worked?
It was an incoherent, largely waste of money that is now sustaining government at a time when we need to be shrinking government.
Do you think it worked?
As measured by the administration's own goals and objectives, no.
Right.
You know, they said they were going to...
What about the 12,000 jobs that were created in your state as a result of it?
What about Brown and McCain's leader in the Senate, Mr. Responsibility, Mitch McConnell?
A stimulus bill that was supposed to be timely, targeted, and temporary turned out to be a liberal wish list instead. Instead of stimulating the economy and keeping unemployment below 8% as promised, we stand here today with nearly 10% unemployment nationwide and many more Americans struggling to find full-time work.
5 letters, not just seeking money, but explaining why stimulus money is so important to Kentucky.
Republican Pat Tiberi of Ohio trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying it would support businesses and jobs. Republican Mary Bono Mack trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in her home district by saying the funding will provide much-needed assistance. Republican Senator Mike Johans of Nebraska trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home state by saying that just one proposed stimulus-funded project in Nebraska would create 38 new jobs.
Well, that's what the Recovery Act was. And let's face it, some of you have been at the ribbon cuttings for some of these important projects in your communities.
Republican Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home state by highlighting a project he says would create over 200 jobs in the first year and at least another 40 new jobs in the following years. Republican John Linder of Georgia trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying the employment opportunities created by this program would be quickly utilized.
Lindsey Graham said this morning on Meet the Press that the president's budget is scary. He called it a reckless exercise that is scaring people. Is your budget scary?
We've had 8 years of one approach, didn't work. We're offering a new approach. Let's look at what the Republicans are putting on the table. The senior Republican on the House Budget Committee has put forward a plan that includes $3 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations, a Medicare program when you turn 65, you'd be handed a check for 80% of the cost of health care and then you're on your own, and a Social Security plan in which your Social Security funds would be invested in the stock market. I'm not making this stuff up. That is their alternative plan.
Republican Mike Castle of Delaware trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by sending out press releases touting how imperative those funds were. Do you want to see Mike Castle of Delaware handing out one of those giant checks? Yeah, as if he hadn't actually voted to kill the money that's in that check. Mike Castle's running for senator from Delaware now, presumably on the platform of being a giant hypocrite.
Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Delaware have spoken. No more politics as usual. I'm not a witch.
Republican Eric Cantor not only trashed the stimulus and voted no on it, he coordinated the feat of having all House Republicans vote against it.
All of us know that the unemployment rate is unacceptably high. We know that the economy continues to suffer and people are hurting.
Then he held a job fair in his home district at which nearly half of the companies who were at the job fair, because they were in a position to hire, had received stimulus funds. Even John Boehner, leader of the House Republicans, who has led the trashing of the stimulus and voted no on it, and who bragged so enthusiastically on Republicans in the House all voting against it, when it came to his home district, John Boehner praised the federal funding for shovel-ready projects that will create much-needed jobs.
The American people are still asking the question, where are the jobs?
So the leader of the Republicans in the House said that financial reform was like, I'm quoting here, using a nuclear weapon to target an ant. That's what he said. He compared the financial crisis to an ant. This is the same financial crisis that led to the loss of nearly 8 million jobs.
He was referring to an interview Republican leader John Boehner did yesterday with a Pittsburgh newspaper. Boehner was asked directly about the Wall Street reform bill now before Congress and said this. This is killing an ant with a nuclear weapon.
Same crisis that cost people their homes, their life savings. He can't be that out of touch.
Republican Senator Jim Inhofe of denying global warming fame, he trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home state by saying it would help spur additional economic growth. Republican Jack Kingston of Georgia trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying these funds should help save or create local jobs. Republican John Carter of Texas trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying it was a victory for the economy in Central Texas. Republican Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania trashed the stimulus, voted no, then praised its effect in his home district by saying it would be great for employment in the area. Shall I go on? I could. I could keep going till the top of the hour and beyond. But you get the idea, right? This stuff isn't secret.
I mean, you remember all the fear-mongering that was going on during the health care debate, right? Remember? All of you were told, you know, you're going to lose your health care. It's going to be socialized. Government's going to come in and death panels are going to be set up. And remember that? And now we're about 3-4 months into it, and everybody's looking around. But at the time, it was scary.
And also from the public sector. I mean, if it is teachers, if it is university professors, if it is people that are building infrastructure and stuff like that. I mean, there's in every category, there's jobs that have been created in California. 150,000. These are 150,000 people that are going home today with a check, that are providing for the family, that can buy the textbooks for their kids, that are feeling wanted and needed and feeling productive. I mean, about a job, it's not just a job, it's all of those kind of other things. So I'm happy that we got this money. I'm happy that we have put 150,000 people to work, and there will be more people that we will put to work.
You do it again.
Is that it?
Jeb Henserling, Texas, and that'll be it.
Jim's going to wrap things up?
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, a year ago, I had an opportunity to speak to you about the national debt. And something that you and I have in common is we both have small children. We know that under current law, that government, the cost of government, is due to grow from 20% of our economy to 40% of our economy. A budget that ensured that government did not grow beyond the historical standard of 20%. And unfortunately, I believe that budget was ignored. And since that budget was ignored, what were the old annual deficits under Republicans have now become the monthly deficits under Democrats. Spending is necessary. The national debt recession. Many of us believe, frankly, it's part of the problem, not part of the solution, but I understand and I respect your view. But this is what I don't understand. Triple the national debt over the next 10 years. Surely you don't believe 10 years from now we will still be mired in this almost 24.5% of the economy. Now, very soon, Mr. President, you're due to submit a new budget. And my question is...
Jim, I know there's a question in there somewhere, because you're making a whole bunch of assertions, half of which I disagree with, and I'm having to sit here listening to them. At some point, I know you're going to let me answer.
The conservative newspaper, The Washington Times, had a big feature on this today. Politico has reported on it as well, calling what the Republicans are doing here a cash and trash strategy. The blog Think Progress has done yeoman's work tallying up all the Republicans who have done this and posting pictures of them handing out the giant checks representing funds that these politicians voted against, even though they're now taking credit for handing it over. Even the president has called out Republicans for attending ribbon cuttings for stimulus-funded projects that they voted against.
I have to point out, though, that some of the very same folks in Congress who opposed the Recovery Act and claim that it hasn't worked have been all too happy to claim credit for Recovery Act projects and the jobs those projects have produced. They come to the ribbon cuttings and they found a way to have their cake and vote against it, too.
The White House has put some of the documentation of Republican hypocrisy on this in writing. None of this is a secret, which is the most important thing to understand about it. Republicans right now do not care about policy.
I want to challenge you a little bit. When President Obama came into office, we were losing jobs at a horrendous rate. We're going to throw up a graphic right behind us. You can't see it, but I'm sorry for that. But you've seen these numbers before. It's that curve that shows how many jobs we were losing. Until President Obama came into office, 700,000 a month. He passed a stimulus. He got the government geared up. We are now creating jobs. And yet you have been intensely critical. President Bush, we went over the cliff. We were losing hundreds of thousands of jobs. President Obama, a stimulus package that by all economic accounts has worked. What is your answer to the charge? You're playing politics. You're now the candidate of no. You've said that yourself.
Nancy Pelosi noted this week that 200 bills have passed the House that have been sitting in the Senate not going nowhere, and 70% of those, more than 70% of those, had more than 50 Republican votes when they passed the House, is a key of what's going wrong. There's a real problem in the Senate.
What was wrong with what President Obama did in the stimulus, which a third of which was a tax cut as requested by the Republican Party?
Well, I would say, Elliot, I don't know where the consensus is that it worked. The administration said we had to borrow $1 trillion in the stimulus bill or unemployment would reach 8%. It's now more than 9.5% across the country. It clearly has not worked, and that's because this administration didn't learn the lessons of the last administration, and that is you can't borrow and spend with deficits and debt your way back to a growing economy. Look,
Congressman, when you say it hasn't worked, when President Obama came into office, we were losing jobs at a clip of 700,000 a month. We now have positive job growth. And so how can you say that hasn't worked when the policies of President Bush, where the curve was going straight down, we turned that around 180 degrees. How can you possibly say that hasn't worked?
Well, again, I think the administration said that we needed to spend $1 trillion in the stimulus bill or unemployment would go to 8%. It's 9.5%. It's now, I think last month, Elliot, we are now at 9.5% or higher for the longest time in succession since the Great Depression.
By which I mean they will not vote for things that even they admit are good policies.
Jim, with all due respect, I've just got to take this last question as an example of how it's very hard to have the kind of bipartisan work that we're going to do, because the whole question was structured as a talking point for running a campaign. Now, look, let's talk about the budget once again, because I'll go through it with you line by line. The fact of the matter is that when we came into office, the deficit was $1.3 trillion. 1.3. So when you say that suddenly I've got a monthly budget that is higher than the annual, or a monthly deficit that's higher than the annual deficit left by the Republicans, that's factually just not true. And you know it's not true.
You know, the American people, I tell you, we've been to 13 cities outside of Washington with the Fiscal Wake Up Tour. They are absolutely starved for two things, the truth and leadership.
What is true is that we came in already with a $1.3 trillion deficit before I had passed any law. What is true is we came in with $8 trillion worth of debt over the next decade. Had nothing to do with anything that we had done. It had to do with the fact that in 2000, when there was a budget surplus of $200 billion.
Tonight I come before you to announce that the federal deficit will be simply zero.
Well, those days are gone.
You had a Republican administration and a Republican Congress, and we had 2 tax cuts that weren't paid for. You had a prescription drug plan, the biggest entitlement plan, by the way, in several decades, that was passed.
With one stroke of the pen, Walker says the federal government increased existing Medicare obligations nearly 40% over the next 75 years.
We'd have to have $8 trillion today invested at Treasury rates to deliver on that promise.
And how much do we have?
Zip.
Without it being paid for.
The problem with Medicare, Walker says, is people keep living longer and medical costs keep rising at twice the rate of inflation. But instead of dealing with the problem, he says the President and the Congress made things much worse just 3 years ago when they expanded the Medicare program to include prescription drug coverage.
The prescription drug bill was probably the most fiscally irresponsible piece of legislation since the 1960s. The imbalance, well, because we promised way more that we can afford to keep. $8 trillion added to what was already a $15 to $20 trillion underfunding. We're not being realistic. We can't afford the promises we've already made, much less to be able to piling on top of them.
You had 2 wars that were done through supplementals. And then you had $3 trillion projected because of the lost revenue of this recession. That's $8 trillion. Now, we increased it by $1 trillion because of the spending that we had to make on the stimulus. I am happy to have any independent fact checker out there take a look at your presentation versus mine in terms of the accuracy of what I just said. Now, going forward, here's the deal.
We've gone from surpluses to huge deficits, and our long-range situation is much worse.
If we do not move swiftly to sign the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act into law, an economy that is already in crisis will be faced with catastrophe. This is not my assessment. This is not Nancy Pelosi's assessment. This is the assessment of the best economists in the country.
He calls it a fiscal wake-up tour, and he is telling civic groups, university forums, and newspaper editorial boards that the U.S. has spent, promised, and borrowed itself into such a deep hole it will be unable to climb out if it doesn't act now.
I just want to repeat, because I don't want any confusion here. I believe that legislation of this enormous magnitude, that by necessity we are moving quickly. We're not moving quickly because we're trying to jam something down people's throats. We're moving quickly because we're told that if we don't move quickly, that the economy is going to keep on getting worse. We'll have another 2 or 3 or 4 million jobs lost this year. I'd love to be leisurely about this. My staff is worn out, working around the clock. So is David Obey's staff. So is Nancy Pelosi's staff. We're not doing this because we think this is a lark. We're doing this because people are counting on us.
As Walker sees it, the survival of the republic is at stake.
When it comes to the Recovery Act, again, every specific provision in it, people like. And so, I think that one of the challenges we had 2 years ago was we had to move so fast. We were in such emergency mode that it was very difficult for us to spend a lot of time doing victory laps and advertising exactly what we were doing because we had to move on to the next thing. And, you know, I take some responsibility for that. I mean, our attitude was we just have to get the policy right. And we did not always think about making sure we were advertising properly what was going on.
Well, here we have a program that CBO has scored as making the Treasury $1 billion over the next 10 years, and yet it could create credit equal to about $300 billion of credit to small businesses. But the Republicans are opposing it. And why is that?
If we do not move swiftly to sign the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act into law, an economy that is already in crisis will be faced with catastrophe.
There's no rational reason unless the goal is to drive the American economy into a double-dip recession.
You feel like, honestly, that Republicans are opposing the policies they're opposing and promoting the policies they're promoting because they want a bad economic outcome?
Well, you know, I didn't come to D.C. as cynical as I feel here a year and a half later as a senator. What I have seen is everything politicized by the primary elections and the general election plan for this year, and it certainly appears that all sense has lost, all sorts of partnership to make American economy work for working Americans is gone.
This is not my assessment. This is not Nancy Pelosi's assessment. This is the assessment of the best economists in the country. This is the assessment of some of the former advisors of some of the same folks who are making these criticisms right now. Millions more Americans will lose their jobs. Homes will be lost. Families will go without health care. Our crippling dependence on foreign oil will continue. That is the price of inaction. This isn't some abstract debate. Last week we learned that many of America's largest corporations already laid off thousands and are planning to lay off tens of thousands of more workers. Today we learned that in the previous week the number of new unemployment claims jumped to 626,000.
At this hour, here are the numbers. About 15 million Americans are out of work, unemployed. 41.8 million Americans are on food stamps. That's hard to say. Think about that. Damn near 42 million Americans are on food stamps. And where are the Republicans? John Boehner is asking, well, where are the jobs? And big business is wasting billions of dollars on themselves. According to the Washington Post, large companies like Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, PepsiCo, and others, well, they're using their massive profits buying back shares instead of investing capital for job creation in this country.
That was Senator Jeff Merkley speaking on this show back in July. That case that he made, you can almost see that it pained him to make it, has stuck with me now for months. I think about what he said there in that segment back in July a lot. The prospect that some of what Congress is doing that is blowing it on the economy is happening on purpose. I think about that a lot. Case in point. There is a program that is part of the stimulus that is credited with creating almost 250,000 American jobs. One program, that many jobs. The overall stimulus in total is on track to create 3.5 million jobs. This one $5 billion program alone is responsible for 250,000 of those jobs. What do you get when you demonstrably create a lot of jobs in an otherwise horrendous economy for relatively little spending? You get a totally not at all controversial program. When CNN did a report recently on this program, they called it the stimulus program even a Republican could love.
The American people know that our challenges are great. They're not expecting Democratic solutions or Republican solutions. They want American solutions. I've said that same thing to the public, and I've said that in a gesture of friendship and goodwill to those who have disagreed with me on aspects of this plan. But what I have also said is don't come to the table with the same tired arguments and worn ideas that helped to create this crisis.
Republicans vote against bills to stop outsourcing American jobs, and then they go out and say stuff like this.
The American people are still asking the question, where are the jobs? The question right now that the American people are asking are, where are the jobs?
American people are continuing to ask the question, where are the jobs? The president says we're moving forward,
But the American people are asking, where are the jobs? The American people keep asking, where are the jobs?
You think Boehner would respond to this story? Hell no. He's nothing but a complete fraud, in my opinion.
Republican governors who saw this program working in their states became some of the most vocal advocates for this program. Republican governors like Haley Barbour of Mississippi, former head of the Republican Party, current head of the Republican Governors Association. Even he, arguably the most partisan governor in the country, has talked about how much he loves this program. He credits it with creating 5,300 jobs in his state alone. This is not a controversial program. It works. It essentially subsidizes companies and organizations to hire people or to keep jobs they would otherwise eliminate. It is very simple. It has very little overhead. It is efficient. It does exactly what it is designed to do. Republicans and Democrats alike, when they've seen how many people it has kept employed in the private sector, they like it very much. Nobody's arguing against it on its merits, either in the states or in Washington. And yet, the Republicans blocked it.
The Republican Party loves to pretend that they have they got the pulse of the working men and women of this country. The fake conservative outrage about jobs really is the biggest hoodwink we've ever seen. Boehner and his buddies at the country club really want to know where the jobs are? Well, what they ought to do is go down and ask these major corporations that are hoarding the money and buying back the stock. That's where the jobs are, John. Ask your friends to show some economic patriotism. But you see, if they do that, then, of course, there'll be some good job numbers, and then it'll make the Obama team look good. And, hell, we got an election coming up. Who cares about the 99ers, right? Who cares about all those people on food stamps? Who cares about all those unemployed people in this country? That's what this election is all about. The haves and the have-nots. Whose side are you on?
So we are taking prudent steps. But you talk to Ted Strickland and what's happening in Ohio, and you ask him whether they need some relief in terms of the unemployment insurance rates that are going sky high, and him having to pick up all kinds of folks who are suddenly seeking food stamps who had been working all their lives.
In the House, where there is no filibuster and the Democrats have a large majority, an extension of this thing was passed twice. But in the Senate, well, in March, New Hampshire Republican Senator Judd Gregg blocked it. Last month, again, Democrats tried to reboot the program, keep funding it. Utah Republican Senator Orrin Hatch blocked it. Then last week, 2 days before the program that created almost 250,000 jobs was set to expire, it got blocked again. You can thank Wyoming Republican Senator Mike Enzi for it this time.
The majority has known this program is going to expire at the end of this month all year and have taken no steps to reauthorize this important social safety net program.
Not true. Democrats tried to reauthorize it in March, you blocked it. Democrats tried to reauthorize it in September, you blocked it. Democrats tried to reauthorize it last month, you, sir, personally blocked it. Even as you called it an important safety net that you were blocking.
I want to read you something which I think many people may not be aware of. You know, the Chamber of Commerce is getting into the news a bit lately. In July 1st, 2004, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce president and CEO Thomas Donahue urged American companies to send jobs overseas. Now, what do you think about that in terms of economic patriotism? These guys would much prefer to pay workers in China 50 cents an hour than reinvest in the United States of America, create decent jobs here. That's the reality.
Now, one of the keys to job creation is to encourage companies to invest more in the United States. But for years, our tax code has actually given billions of dollars in tax breaks that encourage companies to create jobs and profits in other countries.
Take a look at a very, very, very short video clip. You ready? Check this out.
There are legitimate values in outsourcing, not only jobs, but work.
That was Tom Donahue. Tom Donahue is the president and CEO of the United States Chamber of Commerce.
There are legitimate values in outsourcing, not only jobs, but work.
There are legitimate values in outsourcing, not only jobs, but work. The president of the Chamber of Commerce, in his capacity as the president of the Chamber of Commerce, endorsing outsourcing, endorsing the practice of American companies shipping jobs overseas so those jobs can be done by people in foreign countries instead of by Americans. Quote, U.S. Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Thomas Donahue urged American companies on Wednesday to send job overseas. Donahue said people affected by offshoring should, quote, stop whining.
We're here today to put forth a new governing agenda built by listening to the American people that offers a new way forward.
The Republicans in Washington claimed to draw their ideas from a website called America Speaking Out. It turns out that one of the ideas that's drawn the most interest on their website is ending tax breaks for companies that ship jobs overseas. The funny thing is, when we recently closed one of the most egregious loopholes for companies creating jobs overseas, Republicans in Congress were almost unanimously opposed. The Republican leader, John Boehner, attacked us for it and stood up for outsourcing instead of American workers.
Donahue said people affected by offshoring should, quote, stop whining. The benefits of offshoring jobs outweighs the cost. During a trip to India around the same time, Tom Donahue assures business leaders, quote, we are very confident that outsourcing is here to stay. It would be absolutely foolish to try and stop the phenomenon. Woo! Outsourcing? Awesome. All of you Americans who have lost your jobs because your job was outsourced to India or China, the Chamber of Commerce has a message for you, and it is, I quote, stop whining.
Let's turn now to Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who joins us tonight. Thank you for your time, sir.
Good to be with you, Keith.
Republicans fought job creation every step of the way. Now they're reaping the benefits, so it's mission accomplished, right?
Well, I tell you, it is incomprehensible to me that John Boehner would have the chutzpah to talk about jobs when in the Bush administration, after 8 years, they ended up losing 600,000 private sector jobs. During the Bush years, we lost 5 million good-paying manufacturing jobs, and they took us through their deregulation policies to the biggest financial collapse that we had since the Great Depression. So the idea of these guys talking about jobs is really incomprehensible.
So all the people employed in that program are now going to join the ranks of the unemployed, which is going to be horrendous for the economy. It is not only a bad situation and an individual tragedy for each of those Americans now out of the workforce again, it is also bad for the economy as a whole because those people are no longer earning any money, which means they are no longer going to be spending any money, which means we are all dragged down as a nation.
I think it is very clear to anyone who spends 5 minutes looking at this issue is that while the Democrats, in my view, and I speak as an independent, have not been as strong as they should be in protecting the working class of this country, there is no question but the Republicans are out there protecting Wall Street, the millionaires and billionaires. And that's what they have done, and that's what they're doing right now.
Senator, this means that if the Democrats maintain the majority in the Senate and the House, the majority party is going to have to operate differently in dealing with this mindset.
You're absolutely right.
It's not going to be able to be the olive branches coming out of the White House and let's wait 3 months to see if we can get another Republican senator on board and do this bipartisan tap dance in this country. This is about power. This is how they want to run the country. And if the Democrats win, they're going to have to operate differently. Am I right or wrong?
It's high time. It is high time that the Democrats use power the way the Republicans are. You'd be hard-pressed to know that the Democrats have 59 in the Senate and the Republicans 41. It's high time that we said there's not going to be any more outsourcing. We're going to come up with a fair trade policy rather than unfettered free trade. And if you Republicans want to vote with corporate America, you go for it. But everybody in this country is going to know it, because if you filibuster, we're going to keep this place open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No more tax breaks for billionaires. We're going to use that money to reinvest in our infrastructure, create millions of good-paying jobs. You are not going to raise the retirement age for Social Security to 70. We're going to revisit Wall Street and really make some strong reforms. Bottom line, Ed, and I think this is what you have been saying, the Democrats have got to make it clear to working class of this country that they are really on their side. They're prepared to mix it up with these very powerful people. It ain't going to be easy. But I think if we win the support of the majority of working people in this country, we can stand up and make some real changes.
And so a totally successful, bipartisan-endorsed, non-controversial program credited with putting 250,000 Americans back to work in 37 states, that program is now dead.
Every economist, from the left and the right, has said because of the Recovery Act, what we've started to see is at least a couple of million jobs that have either been created or would have been lost. The problem is 7 million jobs were lost during the course of this recession. So we've still got a big hole to fill. It's going to be absolutely critical that Congress acts over the next several months to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that even though the economy is now growing again, almost 6% last quarter, people have not started hiring again. And we've got to do everything we can to put people back to work because we need a sustainable recovery over the long term.
Do the American people get it, in your opinion? I mean, this is the Chamber of Commerce story that you just brought up. What the corporations are doing, I mean, it's all on the table for the American people to see. It would seem to me that the Democrats would roll on November 2nd.
Well, the answer is the Democrats had better win, or else we're going to see more outsourcing. You're going to see more tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires.
Coors Tech, North America's largest maker of technical ceramics, a small business founded by Adolf Coors. A small business.
You're going to see more deregulation so we can have another Wall Street disaster or a BP disaster. And I'll tell you what else you're going to see. You're going to see either the privatization of Social Security or a movement in that direction, or raising the Social Security retirement age to 70.
Republicans have never made a substantive argument against this program, but they have blocked it not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Does Mr. Boehner know about this? Is it something he was out that day in school? Is this ignorance, or is it cynicism, or what? How can he stand there and say you can't spend your way out of a recession or worse?
Keith, this is what they want to do. Right now, what they want to do is give $700 billion in tax breaks to the wealthiest 2% at a time when almost all income gains made in recent years have gone to the very, very rich. And the top 1% now earns more income than the bottom 50%. That's apparently not enough for Mr. Boehner.
The Dead River Company, a small business with 1,200 employees, $500 million in annual revenue, and commercial real estate valued at $300 million. A small business.
When more things are made in America, more families make it in America. More jobs are created in America. More businesses thrive in America. But Republicans in Washington have consistently fought to keep these corporate loopholes open. Over the last 4 years alone, Republicans in the House voted 11 times to continue rewarding corporations that create jobs and profits overseas.
The same Tom Donahue, whose Chamber of Commerce has championed outsourcing, is now running TV ads like this all across the country.
Rising unemployment means families are suffering. Tell Richard Blumenthal to stop. His job-killing lawsuits are hurting Connecticut families. The U.S. Chamber is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Richard Blumenthal's a job killer. So says the United States Chamber of Commerce. Here's what's awkward about that sort of an attack ad being launched by the Chamber of Commerce, of all people. Over the last 16 years, more than 87,000 Connecticut workers saw their jobs shipped overseas. Over the last 16 years, more than 87,000 people in Connecticut lost their jobs because a Connecticut company gave their job to someone in another country. And that is something that the Chamber of Commerce promotes. That's according to a new report out by the nonpartisan group Campaign Money Watch. 87,000 jobs lost in Connecticut alone due to outsourcing. But the pro-outsourcing guys want you to think that it's Richard Blumenthal. He's the job killer.
The president in recent days has been out and about asking the base to get energized and recognize the moment of what we face in this election. That's what we face. We face that right there. We see big corporate America hoarding the profits, buying back their stock instead of investing in job creation when we're going through the worst economic time since the Depression.
We've just on the small business issue alone, we have cut taxes for small businesses 8 times during the course of the last 18 months. So we're hardly Johnny-come-latelys on this issue. Now, When you put all the things we've done together, it has made a difference. 3 million people have jobs that wouldn't have them otherwise had we not taken these steps. The economy would be in much worse shape. But as I said before, we're not where we need to go yet, which means that if we're not there yet, what else can we do? And the proposals that we've put forward are ones that historically, again, have garnered bipartisan support.
Democrats are putting politics over prosperity.
There are legitimate values in outsourcing, not only jobs, but work.
That's the Chamber of Commerce, an organization that takes foreign donations, that advocates for outsourcing, and that is now among the biggest players in this year's elections. They're running tens of millions of dollars of almost entirely anti-Democrat ads.
In my view, and in the view of many people in the Democratic caucus, what we should be doing is using a lot of that $700 billion for infrastructure improvement, rebuilding our roads, our bridges, our rail systems, our water systems. And when you do that, over a period of time, you're going to create millions of good-paying jobs.
Also, remember, people at the top, if they did get that one-year extension that they did not expect, that would put a huge hole in the budget deficit that apparently, and I think justifiably, many people, Republicans and others, are very concerned about. That, in fact, millionaires and millionaire families would get next year, if the Bush tax cut were extended, $31 billion. $31 billion that could otherwise be used to, say, save the jobs of teachers or police officers or firefighters who would use their money and who would spend it and whose jobs are very important.
And a small business called McElhaney. The McElhaney family selling their Tabasco brand pepper sauce out of their kitchen to 160 countries. A small business.
But that personal and collective economic disaster does have a silver lining. As the jobs numbers get pushed into even worse territory than they are already in, that might be great news for Republicans in the elections. The last major jobs report before the election came out today. Some private sector job gains, but otherwise not good. Not good for the unemployed, not good for the employed but still struggling in a lousy economy, not good for the economy itself, not good for the country. If only we had some sort of non-controversial, effective, efficient, bipartisan endorsed jobs program. Of course, that wouldn't be good for the Republicans. They'd probably block it.
I'll tell you something. You know, I'm on the floor of the Senate a whole lot, and it astounds me that on every single issue of significance, no matter what it is, they are filibustering, filibustering, filibustering. Here they are. They tell us that they're the great supporters of small business. We brought together a small business bill which will provide affordable loans to businesses which desperately need them so they can expand, so they can create decent paying jobs, and we barely got any Republican support at all. So if you're asking me, do I think that the Republicans are more interested in creating jobs, expanding the middle class, or are they really interested in defeating anything that President Obama brings forth? Are they more interested in protecting the interest of their wealthy and powerful supporters? I would have to say the latter is true.
Now, Democrats in the White House have attempted to make this a big campaign issue in recent weeks. They've highlighted the fact that groups like the Chamber of Commerce are blanketing the airwaves with ads without disclosing where they're getting their money from.
They don't disclose who's behind the ads. Could be an oil company, could be an insurance company, could be Wall Street. You don't know. Are you going to let special interests from Wall Street and Washington and maybe places beyond our shores come to this state and tell us who our senators should be? That's not just a threat to Democrats, that's a threat to our democracy.
They don't disclose who's behind their ads. Their money could be coming from beyond our shores. President Obama making this a campaign issue. And that, of course, has probably predictably caused this reaction on the right.
I would like to make this the biggest fundraising day in the Chamber's history. I am donating $10,000 to the Chamber of Commerce now.
Because they could sure use the help. That's amazing. Amazing. That was Fox News host Glenn Beck today, encouraging his listeners to fork over their own hard-earned cash to give it to the Chamber of Commerce to promote the outsourcing of American jobs, asking regular Americans who presumably get paychecks and stuff to help out the poor corporate titans. Because, you know, why not? Obama, boo.
In the last 30 years, 55% of all income growth in America went to the top 1%. And what you're seeing is a nation in which a few people not only have tremendous amounts of money, but they are also using that money, as you just indicated, in the political process.
Yes.
Billionaires are spending that money undisclosed, running these horrendous ads all over this country. It is high time Democrats stood up to these billionaires and millionaires and work with the working families of this country to create a nation which does well for all of us and not just for the people on top.
Yeah, the Chamber of Commerce also running this ad in the great state of Missouri.
In the past 2 years, Missouri's lost thousands of good-paying jobs. So why does Robin Carnahan support Card Check, an unfair scheme to grow unions?
Did you see that figure that they flashed on the screen there at the beginning? Missouri lost 120,000 jobs. Take a guess at where some of those jobs went. Ding, 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 ding. That's right. More than 102,000 people who live in Missouri lost their jobs because Missouri companies decided they would rather fire Americans and instead have people in other countries do that work. Chamber of Commerce is all for it. Remember, according to them, outsourcing is good.
There are legitimate values in outsourcing, not only jobs, but work.
The Chamber of Commerce is flooding the airwaves right now with a $75 million ad blitz, almost entirely focused on blaming Democrats for killing jobs, even as they openly support American companies firing Americans to have the work done by people in other countries instead.
Instead of playing politics, I took whatever steps were necessary to stop an economic free fall. I did what we needed to do, even if it wasn't popular, even if it wasn't easy, because y'all did not elect me to do what was easy. You didn't elect me to spend all day looking at the polls and figure out how to keep me in office. You elected me to do what was right.
On policy terms, they have been caught bragging on the stimulus as good policy. I have no doubt that some of them think that health reform is good policy. We know they think that things like a deficit commission or cap and trade or PAYGO are good policy because they're on the record supporting them. But they're not going to vote for them because screw policy.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Weiner.
Gentleman's recognized.
Great courage to wait until all members have already spoken and then stand up and wrap your arms around procedure. We see it in the United States Senate every single day where members say, we want amendments, we want debate, we want amendment, but we're still a no. And then we stand up and say, oh, if only we had a different process, we'd vote yes. You vote yes if you believe yes. You vote in favor of something if you believe it's the right thing. If you believe it's the wrong thing, you vote no. We are following a procedure. I will not yield to the gentleman, and the gentleman will observe regular order.
New York Congressman Anthony Weiner clearly was unhappy that most Republicans were not going to support a bill to provide more than $7 billion to people sickened by dust from the attack on the World Trade Center, and he launched into a tirade to let them know in no uncertain terms.
Gentleman thinks that if he gets up and yells on it, he's going to intimidate people into believing he's right. He is wrong. The gentleman is wrong. The gentleman is providing cover for his colleagues rather than doing the right thing. It's Republicans wrapping their arms around Republicans rather than doing the right thing on behalf of the heroes. It is a shame, a shame. If you believe this is a bad idea to provide health care, then vote no. But don't give me the cowardly view that, oh, if it was a different procedure, the gentleman will observe regular order and sit down.
But Weiner was just getting going.
The gentleman will sit. The gentleman is correct in sitting. I will not.
This is quite obviously not in order.
Gentleman will suspend.
I will not stand here
Gentleman is recognized.
and listen to my colleagues say, oh, if only I had a different procedure that allows us to stall, and then vote no. Instead of standing up and defending your colleagues and voting no on this humane bill, you should urge them to vote yes, something the gentleman has not done.
Congressman Weiner has a history of railing against Republicans, but this animated rant was also personal because the bill would benefit some constituents. His comments drew a smattering of applause but didn't have an impact.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 847?
The bill failed by more than 20 votes.
Representative Weiner was responding to Representative Peter King, who had just spoken before him. Peter King and Anthony Weiner are both co-sponsors of this bill that failed, and we're going to talk about why it failed in just a moment. We did invite Representative King to join us. He is somebody who has joined us in the past quite regularly. He was not able to join us today, but we do have with us Congressman Anthony Weiner, a Democrat from New York. Congressman Weiner, no one has ever doubted that you are a passionate guy. Anybody who's ever followed you in politics, you're passionate. I think most of your colleagues are. But even you said earlier today to somebody, I guess the Brooklyn came out in me. What made you get that mad last night?
Well, this isn't about me or Peter King. You know, for 9 years now, people who got sick because they did the right thing, they came to ground zero to try to help their neighbors. Sometimes they were just living in the wrong neighborhood. Those people are quite literally dying every single day. You know, I have a guy that works for me, Ed Colton, that every day I listen to him cough and wheeze. He was a police officer who is now retired. This is what this is about. And, you know, sometimes you think, even in this moment in our political lives, that there are some things that should transcend politics. You have nights like last night, where 95% of Democrats voted to give 9/11 responders health care, and simply because it was a Democrat majority, just about every Republican voted no. And frankly, that was outrageous. And the fact that the excuses that were being made, well, we don't like this being done so quickly, we don't like it being done on this calendar, we don't like it on this day. At the end of the day, I think the American people want us to stand up and vote for what we think is right. And that's what got my goat last night.
Screw what even they believe is good for the country. Screw what even they believe is good for their own districts. They are not voting yes for even things that they agree with, for anything substantive. They are not going to vote yes for anything substantive that this president supports. It's not going to happen.
Recently, one of the Republican leaders in the Senate said that if Republicans take charge of Congress, repeal would be one of the first orders of business.
There will be no compromise on ending this era of runaway spending, deficits, and debt.
I believe it's the fundamental responsibility of all who hold elective office to seek out common ground. It may not be always easy to find agreement. At times, we'll have legitimate philosophical differences. And it may not always be the best politics, but it's the right thing to do for our country. That's why I found the recent comments by the top 2 Republicans in Congress so troubling. The Republican leader of the House actually said that this is not the time for compromise. And the Republican leader of the Senate said his main goal after this election is simply to win the next one.
No compromise on repealing Obamacare, lock, stock, and barrel.
In the end, it comes down to a simple choice. We can spend the next 2 years arguing with one another, trapped in stale debates, mired in gridlock, unable to make progress in solving the serious problems facing our country.
There'll be no compromise on defending the broad mainstream values of the American people in the way that we spend the people's money at home and abroad on issues that go straight to principle and straight to the concern the American people have on spending and taxes and values. There'll be no compromise.
Or we can do what the American people are demanding that we do. We can move forward.
You're not going to earn Republican votes for a second stimulus, for example, by pointing out that it's good policy that creates jobs. We know they already know that. They concede that in their home districts, and they are still not voting for it. And they are unembarrassed about this fact. They are not embarrassed.
Democrats are putting politics over prosperity.
Charging them with hypocrisy, appealing to their better, more practical, more what's best for the country, patriotic angels, is like trying to teach your dog to drive.
If I said fish live in the sea, they'd say no.
Wastes a lot of time, it won't work, and ultimately the dog comes out of the exercise less embarrassed for failing than you do for trying.
So we don't have time for any more games.
And the point we make in this preamble to our pledge is that we are not going to be any different than what we've been.